We're ready to start our keynote presentation. First quick question, how many people have seen Who Killed the Electric Car?
I did.
How many people, as a result of that movie, felt like they wanted to buy an electric car? So, I'm very pleased to introduce one of the key figures in Who Killed the Electric Car, and now, just in the last year, really someone who's become a good friend, comrade, and we're really pleased to have Chelsea Sexton here at Green Drive Expo. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you.
Let me get this one out of the way right away. When does the sequel come out, and how is it going?
It's going well. We've shot pretty much all of it. We're editing it now, and our goal is to get it out sort of next spring, maybe early summer. We are going to submit for Sundance again if we get in. It'll be in January, end of January. Last time we managed to get in, we brought about 20 different EV folks out there, and we have absolutely decided that if we get in again, we're all going, and it's going to be a party. So consider that your invitation.
How do you define your role? Do you have a title?
Chief Troublemaker?
Tell us, what are you doing? Like, how is your day? How does it work? I know you're active on websites like plugincars.com and other good green car websites. But how do you set up your daily activity, and what's your strategy? What's your role?
Well, I'm not sure there's a lot of strategy about it, but I have a couple different roles. One is sort of the running around, the speaking, the consumer education, that kind of stuff. And a lot of the day-to-day stuff is just basic work trying to get cars on the road. And so I joke that I'm kind of the grout between the stakeholder tiles, because I end up working with automakers and utilities and NGOs and all these different things, quite often about really wonky stuff like residential infrastructure process, or going and beating on the California Energy Commission, or whatever it takes. So a lot of it's not very visible to the public, but those things all kind of cobbled together kind of make up what I do.
What is the nature of your interaction with car companies these days? And not just GM, but the full range.
It varies by car company. Some of them I'm incredibly close to, some not so much. I have sort of offered interaction, tried to interact, I think, with every one of the majors and most of the minors, and they're receptive to different degrees. On the public side, I'm sort of known for both hearing them out and calling them out, and I try to balance that a little bit. I mean, I try to sort of look at what they're doing right and challenge what they're not, but I don't resonate to the, once they've done a bad thing, they're evil for all time and they can never be redeemed. I mean, to me, once we decide that and once we tell them that, there's absolutely no incentive for any of them to do better. So the people that take that tact, I understand why, and I understand why some people will never buy a GM car again, or a Toyota, or whatever their thing is, but I don't think it's helpful as advocates to take that as a broad decision.
So does that mean the introduction of, let's say, the Chevy Volt allows GM to be forgiven for past transgressions?
I think it's too soon to say. I don't think that the Volt will absolve EV1, no matter what. At the same time, there comes a point when we have to not expect that of this car. And most of the people that are at GM today are not people who ever worked on EV1, with the exception of a few engineers, but most of the people who made all the decisions we hate are no longer there. And so, we question, it's a good thing that there's some new blood, no question. But I know there are folks who still want apologies and still want explanations, and there comes a point when the people that are trying to give them don't have the answers. They weren't there, they don't know, they know the party lines, but it's a little bit like trying to get them to apologize for sins of our ancestors. Even if you can get it, it's kind of hollow. So at some point we have to move on and evaluate all of them on what they're doing today. The Volt is a good car. It doesn't mean GM's going to get out of its own way and putting it on the road and getting behind it and all these other things, and I think those are the questions on the table, not just for GM, but for all of them. It's implementation. The last generation didn't suffer for lack of good cars, or for sincerity, for that matter. A lot of people were sincere, but neither of those things will get the job done alone.
What's your biggest fear in terms of the rollout of the Volt, the Leaf, the Ford, Toyota plug-ins, the next generation? What's your biggest fear?
Poor consumer experience.
In what way?
Trying to place an order, the dealer processes, the service processes, the ownership of the vehicle, the communications. We've seen some companies try some early pilot programs already, and that tends to be where they skin the knees. These guys all know how to build a good car. I mean, at the end of the day, there'll be some quality differences and some technology differences, but they all know how to build a decent car. That's really not the issue here. It's, will they get behind it? Can they market it well? Can they appeal to the early adopters who will be, you guys will be, the first few years of these markets? And there's a lot of rhetoric right now about, well, we don't want early adopters, that's just, we'll get through them quickly. We're all about the mainstream. Well, if they can't get to the early adopters, they're never going to see mainstream. And there's a lot of messaging out there that's a little challenging for folks like us. Every single automaker is talking about how their EV is the first real usable EV. I'm thinking some folks over here would beg to differ. So there's some of those sorts of things that, it's an ongoing education process. They mean well, they're not trying to offend anybody, and yet it seems to be so darn easy for them to do it.
What's your view on the need for public charging infrastructure?
He knows me too well. There's a need for a sprinkling of it. I tend to believe we're putting in way too much of it way too soon in some concentrated areas. We benefit in California from having a nice framework of infrastructure left over from the last generation of cars. Some of those are still being used, and there's an interest in preserving those for the RAV drivers and people that can still use them. There's also some funding to retrofit some of them, and there's an interest in building out some new infrastructure. There are certain cities that are going to get way more of it than they have cars to support, and that becomes a challenge because it's a poor use of public funding, for one thing, when it could support a broader area. But it's not a good message for the public to see these vacant chargers day after day after day and resent the fact that they paid for them. So I have, there's one charger company that talks about how we're going to build out infrastructure for the year 2050 now, so we'll be ready when 2050 vehicles come. Well, that's 40 years of stranded assets, and 39 of them are out of warranty. I'm not sure that's the most thoughtful approach. So, we're going to skin some knees. Some of them we already have, and that's harder for us to watch. When we made those mistakes in the 90s, learn from us. It's like parents of teenagers. They have to do it on their own, but you desperately want them to learn from what you did wrong. So some of those conversations, and some of it will be, we don't know yet. We don't know exactly how level 3 or DC fast charging will resonate, how much of it will be required. I think we're doing too much of it, but a sprinkling along roadways would be nice, would it not? To be able to go to Vegas and those sorts of things and answer those questions. Do we need it, 25 of them between LA and San Diego? Probably not. So those sorts of things we'll learn along the way, and to the extent we can step in and try to inform those discussions, that's a lot of what we do every day.
There was a gentleman earlier who asked about when are we going to have a battery that's capable of providing range of 200 or 300 miles. Is that the right question? How do you respond to a question like that?
Well, I guess on the pure face of it, a few years ago, the Teslas can go a couple hundred miles. And they've promised 300 for Model S in a couple of years. At the same time, no, it's not really the right question. It's an understandable one, but there's a much broader market for a 100-mile electric car that's 20 grand than a 300-mile electric car that's 60 grand or more, assuming it could even get to 60. So part of it is just educating people about what they need, and for those people who really need or think they do and can't give that up, there's a Volt, or there's a plug-in Prius, or there's something else. The sheer variety of what's coming is part of what gets us excited. And a lot of us who've used EVs know that really 100 miles is more than enough. But there comes a point, too, where you sort of have to meet people where they are and walk them forward. And for those that will not get into a Leaf or an iNev or a Ford Focus, there's something else for them, and that's okay, too. I had this discussion quite a bit about the Volt in particular because of the GM angst. And if GM were really committed, they'd have done a pure EV, and I understand all those arguments. But at the end of the day, if someone buys a Volt and the average commute is 30-so miles, I have a fan. Their daily drive is going to be covered by an EV anyway. If they want to pay extra for that comfort level of a range extender, I don't have a problem with that. That's their business. Just as I'm not going to tell you what model of car to buy or what color to buy or anything like that. I'm concerned about as many EV miles as possible, and if that safety net makes you comfortable to try one out, for great. And your next one might be a pure EV or your second car.
Okay, what model should I buy and what color? how do you advise people to at least approach the market, right? So we're at a point now where there's the Leaf rolling out, the Volt rolling out, and then within a couple of years, a lot more. Do you divide it up by plug-in hybrid and EV? Do you look at range? What's the handle that you grab onto to figure out which one is for you? Is it the same issues that you would approach any vehicle, a gas-powered vehicle?
To a certain degree. I mean, if you have someone in front of you, you have the opportunity to sort of dig into individual needs, and that really helps guide the discussion. But I think at the end of the day, too, we forget how emotional a vehicle purchase is. And sometimes it really does come down to, is it fun to drive? Is it fast? You know, I'm known for my right foot. You know, Bill Nye has dubbed it the lithium foot. So I kind of look for that in a car. It's not required, but you know, that makes a difference for me. Other people don't care at all about that, and so they won't look for that. And you know, part of it, some people it's, you know, passengers, and I have to seat 5, and so that helps inform the choice. And so it's a variety of both pragmatic and less pragmatic choices that go into it. But you know, part of it's too just how quickly do you want one? Are you willing to wait? You know, do you want the Leaf or the Volt because they're the first things out, or you want to wait for an i-MiEV or a Focus, or what's coming next? And it's no different than any other vehicle choice in that regard.
I'm going to ask a few more questions, and I'm going to walk around and get your questions for Chelsea. How many people have heard of some of the electric car startups? Like, how many people have heard of Coda? How about BYD? Aptera? Okay, can't stump this group, but what is the role of the startups that maybe don't have the track record of putting thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of vehicles out on the road? They might not have the same creature comforts or the same price point. Should we be patronizing those car companies, or is it just too expensive and risky to go for a company that's not putting a really proven product out on the market?
Well, I think in terms of investing in them or buying from them, it depends a little bit on your priorities. Some people really want to support the underdogs. People, you know, part of it's your appetite for risk. There is no guarantee that if you bought, I don't want to pick on one of them, but if you bought one that they'll be around in 5 years, you know, anything could happen. At the same time, there are at least 2 really clear roles for these companies, and I think Tesla proved the first one, and part of it was to challenge Detroit and, you know, put some cars on the road, and they've absolutely made good on that, you know, but at the same time, they were really useful in the aspirational process. I mean, they blew the doors off the golf cart myth. They really showed what an electric car could be, regardless of whether you as an individual could ever afford one or would buy one. At least you knew it didn't have to be a golf cart. So there's that role for them. Obviously, that doesn't keep them in business, and so there's follow-on issues there. But there's also an enabling factor here. We're starting to see more and more partnerships between smaller companies and bigger ones. Tesla has partnered with Daimler and with Toyota. BYD has partnered with Daimler. In fact, Daimler is sort of partnering with anybody that can fog a mirror right now. So there's that as well, where some of these larger companies move slower, or this is all now moving so fast, and every company needs to tick the box if I have a car that plugs in, at least in the works, and they don't necessarily have the native technology. Ford is a slightly different example of that. They partnered with Azure for the Transit Connect and Magna for the Ford Focus rather than doing it themselves. It's, in some cases, a quicker path to market. In some ways, it's just getting technology you don't have natively. And that is absolutely a role for some of these smaller companies. And it may take the form of a partnership, it may take the form of a buyout, it might be a component supplier relationship, but it doesn't have to look like one thing, and yet it still shores up some of these guys as they try to build their own business, but also gives them a way to play. You know, someone will become kind of the Shelby of the electric car world.